In the interest of time flying by, kick things right off by introducing Mike Kirkman to you. I know I've spoken about his work several times over, so I am not going to repeat myself because he has an awful lot of information he wants to share with you here and wants to have a chance to have a conversation. Of course, I've been emphasizing his book, The Conscious Career, which I know you all have downloaded or at least looked at the material that I've given you prior to this presentation. So please keep questions in mind. He actually is going to encourage you to interrupt him while he's talking. What I didn't mention to you is that he's also the author of another book, Leaning on a Weak Read. And hopefully he'll have a chance to talk with you a little bit about his second book, Leaning on a Weak Read. And of course we have his wife Valerie with us, and Valerie has certainly a number of interesting stories to share with you as well about her work here and her life here in the Monroe residence halls. And she was here shortly after we were first admitted, yes?
That's right.
All right. And the special guest, of course, is Arrow, one of the very few Great Dane service dogs in America, yes?
That's right.
So I want you to take a good look at Arrow. Hopefully before we leave, we'll get Arrow to stand up and you can look up at Arrow. And he will look down at you. And you can appreciate the fact that he is here as Valerie's service dog. All right,
Okay.
so I'm going to stop.
Am I on here?
You're on.
Okay. Thank you all for having Valerie and I and Arrow. I should let you know that Valerie and I graduated from this fine institution in 1975. And part of what I'm going to talk to you about has a little bit to do with the uncertainties of life and what you can't know. And I'll just tell you that I never thought my life would end, my nuclear family would be a woman and a 185-pound Great Dane service dog. So let's just start there. This is one of my favorite things to do. I do a lot more of it now than I did 2 or 3 years ago, and I hope to do a lot more in the future. And let me tell you a little bit about myself and the path I've walked, which is really the reason I wrote this book. I've been in the executive search business for 32 years, and what that means is I'm a headhunter. And I've been in 2 major firms and 4 boutiques, and I'm in a boutique at the current time. My partners are, well, one of my partners served in the Bush White House, and she recruited people like Polston and Bernanke and people like that, and a lot of lesser people. I have another partner who headed up another major firm, and he's been in the business 15 years. But what we spend our time doing really is working with big companies primarily, recruiting, assessing, and helping them evaluate and get senior people for their companies. In the course of doing this, over 32 years, I've interviewed about 9,000 people. So when you talk to 9,000 people over that period of time, you get a real interesting idea of how people put their lives together. And you see plenty of enormous successes, you see some amazing train wrecks, and you see everything else in between. And it finally dawned on me about 5, 6 years ago when I wrote this book that something seemed to be missing in some of the lives of people where their careers didn't work out so well. And that it often started in the very beginning. And the premise of this book is that nobody ends up where they start, but starting well can have a lot to do with finishing well. And so what I want to do in this brief moment I've got with you guys is to nudge you a bit in terms of your career awareness, in terms of an overall awareness of yourself within the context of your career and where it's going and your life, etc. There's a great little, if you haven't seen it, you ought to see it. There's a great little Steve Jobs commencement address at Stanford. And he talked about a concept that is very relevant when you get to my point in life. It's kind of irrelevant at your point. And the idea is that it's kind of called connecting the dots. And he said in the beginning of his career, he couldn't connect any of the dots. But then when he got further along, he looked back and the dots connected themselves. And so you can't do it in the very beginning, you can only do it in the end, but how can you make sure in your own life and career the dots are going to connect? And what you need to do is you need to have a belief in yourself, and you need to have certain intuition, and you need to go through this process through the very middle, which in the very middle is your heart. And so what I would encourage you to do, and I'm going to get into some specifics as well, is create an internal atmosphere of kind of individual engagement in this whole process. And that's not easy to do because most of us are drawn outward toward our careers. We objectify what success is. We objectify what we're going to do in our lives. And sometimes that doesn't end up so well. So I want to shift your awareness a little bit in this talk. And I want you to know that there's kind of a thread in all of you, and it's a continuous thread. You'll notice it as you get older, but it moves through your life. You own it. It's who you are. And in the beginning, what I found in my own career was that I sometimes forgot that component. And I made very objective choices based on things that had nothing to do with me. And those, as you might imagine, usually turned out to be the worst choices. So I want you to stay conscious of that thread that runs through your life as you get out of school or finish school and get out of school and go into your careers. Because the closer you are to that thread, it's going to save you in certain perilous moments that we all have. So if I look at it, your career is really part of your life. It's about why you're here. It's about fate. It's about movement. It's about coming to awareness. It's finding your place in the world. It's about meaning. There was a New York Times article about 2 years ago done by hospice workers. And they were asking people who were at the end what their biggest regrets were. And the number one regret was, I wish I'd lived a life more true to myself. The number two regret, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. So you take that wisdom and you take that wisdom at this point in life for me, and you drive it back to the beginning, and I wonder what kinds of choices I might have made. So let me start off with a little bit more pragmatic side. Let's look at the population of the world. When I got out of school, Valerie and I got out of school in 1975, there were 4 billion people in the world. In 2012, there's 7 billion. And all that means is the competition is huge. I started in an analog world, and I moved reluctantly, difficultly, to a digital world. And yet, in a funny way, the world's much smaller. And you all are all digital people, and your lives are going to reflect that. Your careers are going to reflect that. To give you an idea of what my day used to be like, I used to get on a plane 3 days a week, first flight, 6:30 in the morning, and fly to one city, interview 2 people in a airport lounge, fly to another city, interview 2 more people, and fly home late at night. And now when I have to interview somebody, I hit the Skype button, and I talk to them wherever they are in the world. I mean, it's huge, huge change. So the first thing I recommend in my book, and I'm going to use this as my outline, and some of it is popular, some not, was this concept of taking a little time. Many of you won't take any time. Most of you probably won't, unless you have time imposed on you about not finding something when you get out of school, or you just take a sabbatical, or you do something that's funded, something different. But it's called wandering, and very few people in our society, and I wish I'd done a little bit of it myself, wander at all in the very beginning. And what it does, it kind of clears the slate and makes you a little bit more ready to think about and intuit that sort of road that's coming up, which is called kind of the rest of your life. I talk a little bit in this book about the practical pieces of this, and those haven't changed. I mean, more or less, the resumes that I saw when I first got in this business in about 1979 are pretty much the same as they are today. Now, when I used to do a search, I would say, Katie, send me your resume. We have a nice talk, and I'd get the resume 7 days later in the mail, and we chat, and now it's all obviously very immediate. And the transparency in our lives in general is very immediate, and also affects how people go through the tunnels of their career path, how they progress through all those pieces. But the resume is your first message to the world. It's still being used. My point is, it ought to be very short, very concise, and very accurate. I think the worst error we see, the most egregious, is there's hyperbole. People exaggerate. They leave things out. When people get to a certain point in life, they don't tell you when they graduated because they've gotten a little long in the tooth and they don't want to tell you. But for you all, the best advice I have to give you is to be upfront, honest, concise. And at the bottom of the resume, even after 30 years, I still look at the bottom and try to figure out what somebody might have been interested in. Look, they're going to be smart people, they're going to be well-connected people, people are going to have an advantage over you, which you're never going to be able to make up for. That's just inborn. They're going to be people that are always better and people that are always worse. But what you're really trying to do in the job hunt in the very beginning is to create a level of interest, wherever that interest might be. And you do that with a resume. And you're trying to squeeze, a lot of things into a very small format. And then you got to circulate it, and that's the most important point. And people really kind of freeze up at this, and that part is all about what your generation has become, which is about community. It's about networking. 20 years ago, when LinkedIn wasn't around, we had to go actually find people, and we had to source through companies and do a lot of digging to find the people for the roles that we were doing recruiting for. And now we go to LinkedIn, and the world assembles itself around this community that has been invented to allow you to focus on a group of people with a group of skill sets that they collect themselves in this thing called LinkedIn, in these communities of roles and jobs, whereas before you needed to go out and you had to actually find those folks. So you're living in a world where I think the number one thing I would really talk about is creating that community. I find that most young people, and I do a lot of counseling for young people, particularly when they're already out of school, they're in a second or third job and they're very dissatisfied. And the bulk of those people will find their next job through the communities that they have created in their lives. And when you get further along, about 99% of your jobs and career choices will come through people you've known, you've impressed, you've befriended, you've touched in your life. And it's really true. So my point here is just to pay attention to that. I happen to know a few kids, young people, that have paid a lot of attention to it, and it's been very useful to them, and they haven't done that just for the social or career advantage they've gotten from it. They've done it as a sort of a way of touching people and establishing meaning in their own lives. There's a chapter in this book called First Impressions. This is kind of a tough one because really what an interview is about, when you get in interviews, it's the energy goes up or down in a room. When you get in there with somebody else, regardless of what they tell you, what they've done, either they energize you or they don't. And that's hard to really put your finger on. And you've got to create that energy, and about half the time or more it won't work. And what I'm telling you is that every encounter you have, every interview you have is really an experiment.